Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're gonna wait just a few minutes here as people filter in. We'll go ahead and get started. Probably a few minutes after 2 o'clock we'll get started. And if you could, let us know in the chat panel where you are, where you're joining from.
Chicago, Boston, Washington, California, Texas, Walchurch. Very fast. Charlottesville, Michigan, New York, North Dakota, Alaska, Alabama, Phoenix, Texas, Connecticut. I'm now just trying to catch up with new states. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Oregon, Arizona, North Carolina, Colorado, Missouri, someone else from Richmond, someone else from California, Oregon, Canada.
Oh, so
a couple names from Canada. That's
So
great.
fast.
Denver, Minnesota. Rachel, you've got a great group of people from all over the country here.
I'm so excited. And so far I haven't seen a entry of a state I haven't been to, which is exciting.
Wow.
Yes.
Puerto Rico, that's wonderful.
I haven't been there.
That's the first place I haven't been to.
Yes, I'd like to go there.
But just as you do a lot of traveling with your work, I've done a lot of traveling with my work over time and have now rounded out my list of every 50 states.
Oh, good job.
Ohio, Nebraska,
Arizona, Nebraska, great.
Maryland.
It's morning for some folks, afternoon for others.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna give just a couple more minutes until we get started to let people filter in. We still got some folks joining.
Okay, lots of folks from California.
Alabama.
Utah, I'm not sure I saw that one before. Welcome.
Everett, Washington. I have a son named Everett, so every time I go to Everett, Washington, he thinks it's the coolest thing ever.
And I just saw our first Alaska, so that's fun.
Great, okay, so.
From Canada, wonderful.
Lots of folks from Virginia, and Sarah and I are both in Virginia. We're in the Charlottesville area. And, Rachel's joined us from Syracuse, New York. So we're really happy to be here. And we're going to go ahead and at this point get started. I think we've gotten a good number of folks that have joined, and we'll let others filter in. But we're a few minutes after 2, so we will go ahead and get this kicked off. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Winston. I'm the marketing director here at Teachtone. I wanted to cover just a couple of housekeeping notes for today's webinar. So we always get questions around certificate of attendance. We will be emailing out a link where you can download a certificate of attendance. This webinar will be recorded, so we will share out a video recording of the webinar. We'll also share the slide deck as well as links to resources that we talk about in the webinar. So we will send out all of those things in an email about 24 hours after this concludes. A couple other notes. So someone just commented, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. The chat functions to send notes to us as panelists so that we can collect questions or comments. You also have access to a Q&A panel. And so I would say if you do have a question for Rachel, please submit that in the Q&A panel there, and I'll keep track of those. We'll try to save some time at the end of today's webinar to answer a few of those questions. Let's see, anything else? I think that's about it. Oh, and we will be asking a few polls. We have some interactive polls that we'll conduct through the webinar. And I would just ask if you could complete those. That helps us get a sense of who's here and a read on kind of the general understanding of some of the concepts that we're going to cover. So with that, I'll jump into a little bit about Teachtone. For those of you who are new to Teachtone and what we do, we, like I said, are located in Charlottesville, Virginia. We are an education company, and we are the publishers and purveyors of Class, which is a system that looks at interactions between teachers and students, really focusing on ensuring that all students have access to life-changing teachers through really positive, meaningful, quality interactions. And so I mentioned Class, and I'm just curious, and I'll launch a poll, but how familiar are you with Class? If you could take a second to complete that, that'll give us a good idea of who knows what about Class. Okay, so we'll just give a couple more seconds for people to submit that poll, and we'll share out the results. All right, so I'm going to close that poll and we'll share the results. A good mix of folks who are either, it looks like Sarah, about half the folks are using Class for assessment and professional development, which is great. And we love to see that you're not just collecting the data, but using it to improve teaching quality. That's fantastic. And then it looks like roughly 35% are either familiar with Class, but don't use it, or don't know a whole lot about Class. And so I'd just like to say welcome, and that the knowledge of Class is certainly not a prerequisite for this webinar by any means. I'm sure you'll find value regardless of whether you are using Class or not. Okay, so we'll stop sharing that.
And I'll just add into that, that for those of you who are familiar with Class, as you listen to Rachel, she's going to say a lot of things that will just make you go, oh yes, that's like in Class. So it's a very complimentary approach to thinking about supporting children's development.
Yeah, that's great. And so just a quick summary of what Class is. Class stands for the Classroom Assessment Scoring System. It's the leading system for measuring and improving teaching quality. And as I mentioned in kind of the summary about Teachtone, but Class really centers around viewing and measuring effective teacher-child interactions. And the intent is that you would then use that data to inform professional development to help teachers improve. It's a highly researched system, and it's been proven effective in over 200 research studies, which Sarah is very familiar with and helps to lead some of the research around Class. Okay, so a quick check-in. On a scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing today? And I'm actually going to launch a poll, so hold off 1 sec. Okay, so 1 to 5, how are you doing today? 1, not good at all. 5, fantastic.
We have a 6, Winston.
Someone had a 6, that's great.
That's great.
Fantastic, 5.
Yeah.
I always love it when people need to put like I'm a 4.2.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you for responding. We're going to close that poll. I'll share out the results. Most people are doing okay to pretty good. So that's encouraging to see. And I think, this is a testament to resilience of getting through these times with optimism and kind of pushing forward. And we just appreciate that. And for those of you who are in the 2 to 1 range, or even the 3s, hopefully this webinar gives you that little spark of encouragement and some support to maybe move you a little bit higher in the scale. But regardless of how you're feeling today, we're glad that you're here. Okay, and this will just be a something that you can enter in the chat, but question is, what are you most concerned about as children come back to school? We'll keep an eye on these. This is something that we've been asking, and it's helpful for us to understand kind of what your concerns are, so that we can understand what those concerns are, and also hopefully create some resources that might help to address some of those. So I'll read some of these out so that others can hear, but safety of children and staff, safety for all health risks, mental health, fears of children and parents, poor testing capacity, the spread of COVID, health and safety, connections amid safety concerns. And I think that we were just talking about this before the webinar started, but the need for building strong relationships, and how do you do that when there are so many barriers in the forms of safety precautions or distance and not being in person. It's a big concern for many.
Yeah, and when I look, I also am seeing some mental health and social emotional learning, and certainly that's something that Rachel can speak to quite eloquently.
Yep, systems not being responsive to real needs.
Yeah.
Being able to have close interactions, exactly. Yep. I know. Well, it's always interesting to hear this feedback. We've been asking this question for the past several weeks, and I think there are just so many varying concerns, and and these concerns are so weighty. I mean, the challenges in front of educators right now are so substantial that we just sympathize and also appreciate you and what you do. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and keep moving forward. One other poll, so this will be a poll, but if you could let us know what your role is. It's helpful for us to understand who's in the audience, and we can tailor some of the content and discussion to who is here. All right, so we'll just give about 5-10 more seconds and we'll close out this, but good, submit there. And if you're other, go ahead and enter in the chat panel what your role is. That'd be interesting to see. We never really ask that, but that would be good. Mental health consultant, great.
Mental health consultants and family engagement coordinators, family advocates.
Excellent.
People from QRIS systems.
Great.
Oh.
Okay, great. I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll and we'll share out the results of who's in the audience. And I think that this breakdown of our audience has been pretty steady, and it's so good to see such a wide variety of folks here in different capacities. And yep, thank you for participating in that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to make some introductions to Rachel Wagner and Sarah Haddon, and I'm going to let Rachel, if you want to start and tell folks a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do, and then Sarah will let you do the same.
Okay, thank you so much, Winston. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so nice to see all of you here today. My name is Rachel Wagner. I am a mental health specialist and national trainer for the Devereaux Center for Resilient Children. We are the creators of social emotional assessment and planning and strategies for early childhood years. And I will just share, just very quickly, I started my career as a preschool teacher, and I fell in love with early childhood development right out of college, and decided that I was most passionate about children who were using behaviors that were challenging to grown-ups, and decided to become a social worker and wanted to really focus on early childhood mental health. And so 100 years ago, I was fortunate enough to be at the beginning of the early childhood mental health sort of conversation, and was one of New York's first early childhood mental health consultants. I've been a mental health coordinator and consultant to many Head Starts. I know a lot of Head Start friends are here today. I have a lot of experience working with children who have experienced stress, toxic stress, trauma, and show us that in the ways that they behave. My focus is on building resilience in children and building their skills around social and emotional well-being. And I have 4 amazing kiddos of my own who all behave perfectly all the time, right? So that's my story, and I'm here today from Syracuse, New York area.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. And I'm Sarah Haddon. I'm the Senior Advisor for Policy and Research at Teachtone. Like Rachel, I started my career as a preschool teacher. I taught preschool special ed, and most of my experiences with kids with autism. So also like Rachel, I have a great affection for kids who have behaviors that are difficult for adults to understand. Over the years, I've had all sorts of hats, but for the past 16 years, I've worked with the classroom assessment scoring system for 6 years at the University of Virginia in the development of class-based professional development, and for the last 11 years at Teachtone.
Great. Thanks, Rachel and Sarah. Okay, so just to kind of center the discussion today, there are a few topics that we are going to sort of focus on loosely. Sarah's going to ask questions from Rachel. We'll just have a conversation around these topics, but those topics are a framework for defining and understanding resilience, thinking about different types of interventions as varied dosages of similar practices, and then within child protective factors, attachment, self-regulation, and initiative. And as we were talking before this webinar, we said, wow, we really could have a 2 to 3 hour discussion to cover these. So we're going to try and get through as much as we can in the next half hour or so and carve out a little bit of time for questions. So I would encourage you again to submit any questions you might have for Rachel as the conversation progresses in the Q&A panel. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah.
All right, thank you, Winston. And I also, again, just want to thank Rachel for joining us today. We're very happy to have you with us. When we looked at the responses in the chat box about what people were concerned about, it seemed that next to health and safety, one of the really big concern was children's social emotional well-being and their mental health, which is just a great segue into the work you do around resiliency and trauma. So can you talk a little bit about how trauma, and we can think about the context we've been living in for the last however many months now, how does that affect young children?
So I think it's important as we start to think about trauma and think about the pandemic that we're living through and the racial injustice that is becoming more a part of our conversation today, that we don't call everything trauma, that we don't say just because you're experiencing this pandemic that you're experiencing something that is traumatic, because it sort of takes a couple of things to experience something as trauma. And what we know to be true, though, is if you are a child who already had risk factors in your life before this started, you have them compounded. So I often like to think about things in terms of a suitcase analogy. And so if I already had something hard in my suitcase, this experience has put pressure on the suitcase and made some of that sort of ooze into other parts of my life. And so when I think about trauma, I think about, the context of experiencing things without buffers, without people who are there to help you mediate and negotiate some of the things that may be considered toxic stress, and calling upon our resilience is sort of a key thing across the board. And I know we'll get into that.
All right, thank you. And I saw some feedback that it's hard to hear me, so I'm doing my best. So if I look like I'm really close to the screen, that's because that's where the microphone is. So I apologize for that. So when we think about these cumulative effects, which must be just so hard on kids, because kids have big feelings, and when they have this multiplicity, as you mentioned, what can adults do to start to help children start to deal with these big feelings that they're having?
There are so many answers to that question. That's an enormous question, and I love how you say, kids they're having big experiences and big feelings, and probably showing us in big behavioral ways how they're feeling. And so there's a lot that grown-ups can do, but the most important thing grown-ups can do is to focus on their own resilience first. I think it's really, really hard to pour into a child from an empty pitcher. And so, you know, I can tell you a bunch of great strategies, but if you are not feeling okay on the insides, they might not come across with the warmth and connection that are required for them to be successful. So right out of the gate, focusing on adult resilience is key. And through our research on adult resilience, there are some things we know work. There's things that we know will help us regulate a little bit better. And we know that we need to focus in on those. We need to focus in on 4 specific things that sort of show us that we can be resilient. And those are having healthy relationships in our own lives, having healthy initiative, which I saw somebody put in the chat box, I'm productive today. And I think sort of feeling that ability to act on your own thoughts and to make things happen, I think especially during this pandemic has been very hard for people to say. I talked to lots of people who are like, motivation is hard to come by and it's unpredictable when it happens. And so that idea of initiative, that ability to sort of take action. So we need our relationships, we need our initiative, we need our self-regulation. We need the ability to know our own feelings and know our own coping strategies. And we need the ability to understand what our internal beliefs are. So that's the 4th thing that we know helps us be resilient. And internal beliefs is the story you tell yourself about yourself. The message you give yourself when you look in the mirror every morning. And if your internal beliefs are full of a lot of stinking thinking, that can really sort of drain your own pitcher. And so I know there was more to that question, but the first thing I needed to say was as we as grown-ups need to focus on these 4 things for ourselves so that we can't give what we don't have. And so we have to be able to do that and then pour into kids.
And so that's really makes perfect sense, Rachel. Once our adults are at that point where they feel like they are okay, what are some things they can do to help kids develop some self-regulation skills or to feel like they belong in this, you know, they belong?
So
any strategies you know of?
Yes. Oh, well, I mean, we've got a million, but the number one thing I want to tell everyone is that resilience lives in ordinary things. And so when we sort of feel the pressure of, I need to show up big for kids, we need to show up big in really ordinary ways. Resilience happens in these small moments. It happens in being consistent in the way we do routines. It happens in the way that we name feelings or narrate experiences. And so the first thing I want to say is that resilience is ordinary. You're already doing it. What this time probably asks us to do is to turn up the volume, to turn up the dosage on some of those things that we know are good for kids. And I always think that when I'm feeling overwhelmed with a child's needs, I need to focus. And so I focus in terms of resilience. I focus in terms of this idea that I have the capacity to put resilience inside of a child if I do it with thought and intention and focus. And so I might be working with a child or parenting a child who is not showing a lot of self-regulation. And I might notice that they are not coping with their frustration very well. And I need to, first of all, not be overwhelmed and annoyed. I need to say, ooh, this child needs me to pour some self-regulation into him or her. This child needs me to help them understand frustration because we're not coping with frustration. So the key is really to get focused and then to pick your strategy. So now I know I want to help a child handle frustration. How do I do that? Now I'm guessing everyone in this room already knows the answer to that question. We all know the ways that we want to help children cope with frustration. We want to name their feelings. We want to provide them with boundaries that make them feel safe. We want to ask them questions to help them process their feelings. And we want to offer different coping strategies. We all know that we want to do that, but we might need to keep ourselves focused, turn up the dosage, turn up the volume on a strategy that we're already doing, that we already know is good, because our kids may need it more.
That's great. Thank you. We did have a question in the chat box. If you could repeat the 4 strategies originally. And I have relationships, initiative, internal beliefs, and these are for adults. I don't remember the other one.
That's okay. So adults, the research tells us adults need relationships, initiative, healthy self-control, and healthy internal beliefs inside themselves to be able to pour into all the folks who might need them. So that's really how we think about grown-ups, and how we think about children is the same. Research tells us that kids need healthy attachments, they need healthy initiative, they need healthy self-regulation. So the example I just gave you was about self-regulation, staying focused on that. But we also may have kids who really need us to focus on attachment, you know, that their relationships have been inconsistent, and attachments may have been broken. And so what do we do in those moments? Well, first we have to decide we're focusing on attachment. And then we need to figure out sort of what specific part of attachment matters. And for me, a lot of times in working with children who've experienced trauma, the part of attachment that matters most is trust. So I have to figure out a strategy of how can I help a child come to trust me? And again, when I say it like that, everyone in this chat room knows how to get kids to trust them. You do what you say you're going to do. You show up, you be consistent. Everyone knows these things. This is the ordinary magic of resilience. But for our kids right now, for our kids who've experienced trauma, we need to not just do what we say we're going to do, be consistent, show up when we say we're going to show up, but we need to do it on steroids. We need to do it at a really high volume. And so one of my favorite strategies for kids who have a lot of attachment issues and a lot of trauma in their lives is I love to do a strategy that I call intentional promise keeping. Mm-hmm. And that is where I'm not just going to do what I say I'm going to do. I'm going to do it with such explicit intentionality. I'm going to give you an invitation. I'm going to say, we're going to do this together. And then when I do it with you, I'm going to make a big deal that I kept my promise. And I may need to do it at a higher frequency and intensity and duration. So I might need to do it a couple times a day for a couple weeks. And I think that brings me to sort of this idea that so many teachers and parents say, you know, the strategy isn't working. The things I'm doing, like I know all this stuff, but it's not working. I feel you. In so many ways, it feels like nothing's enough. You can pour and it's not enough. And so if I could say anything to everyone who feels like the strategies aren't working, I'd ask you to give yourself a little bit of a break, but then to also think about turning up the volume just a bit on the strategy, and thinking about the intensity, the frequency. Does it need more visual cues with it? Does it need a song that goes with it? Does it need a little extra oomph? And I'm thinking that right now in this time in our nation, all of our strategies need a little oomph, right? Yeah.
I love that idea of the ordinary magic of resilience, because we are resilient. Kids are born hardwired for resiliency, and it's when their expectations are met, the attachment, the bonds are broken, that we have these issues. So it's just nice to think about that it's not necessarily this huge problem that you need to have all sorts of advanced degrees to help support the kids. So I have a follow-up question, but before that, we've got another request for the 5 things that you said to help kids, and name feelings, provide.
Oh, okay, sure. So that comes in a very simple acronym called FLIP. And so if you want to jot it down, it's the F is feelings, the L is limits, the I is inquiries, asking those questions, and the P is prompts, the offering of strategies. And so doing them in sort of that FLIP order can be a helpful way to get yourself oriented in some of those sort of flabbergasted moments, right? So the F, the L, the I, the P.
Okay. Thank you. So one of the other things I thought about as you were talking is, I want to go back because because we had definitely respondents here who are very concerned about going back to school for very obvious reasons. And so that stress is going to be impacting their ability to have their own emotional cup be full. So what are some recommendations you might make to help them start to fill their cup up again?
I'm going to say, I hope you're getting the gist of how I focus on things. I think it's so important to decide what in your pitcher, in your cup, feels lacking. Is it attachments? Is it initiative? Is it self-control or self-regulation? Or is it your internal beliefs? And once you know what that is, then you want to think about the behaviors associated with it. So for example, I might really need to be working on my self-regulation, coping with my feelings. I'm overwhelmed all the time. Everyone's coming to me for everything. And I need to start being able to say no. All right. So I know that that's a strategy that will work for me. But during this crazy time, I might need to really focus and put a little umph into that strategy. And I'm not lying when I tell you that as a person, I need to work on saying no. And that's hard for me. So the umph that I put into the strategy is that I have a little post-it that reminds me to say, let me think about it before I say yes. Because I often say yes to everyone. And my strategy is let me think about it. But if I didn't put a little umph and make the post-it and put it on my computer, I'd say yes. And so we know what's good for us. It's hard to remember sometimes, especially in these really overwhelming times. And so focus on small little things, put some umph behind it, create some visuals for yourself that will help you to remember what you need. Because I always say Daddy Warbucks isn't going to fly in on a plane and give us gobs of money and solve all of our problems. And that's not how resilience works anyway. Resilience works when I start to feel a little better because I've said, let me think about it 3 times. That's when resilience starts to sort of build up and create momentum. Resilience happens when a child starts to trust me when I say, we're going to have a date later. And they believe me and they can settle themselves because they trust that I'm going to show up. And so again, it's in these very small things, but just because they're small doesn't mean they aren't worthy of tremendous focus. So I hope what you're hearing and what I'm describing is small things with tremendous focus.
Yeah. Oh, there's a comment. This is one of the best webinars I've participated in. So I wanted to share that with you. And it just kind of in the corner of my eye, I saw that. So what are some things, some tangible things that teachers can do or coaches can do or families can do, mental health workers can do to help kids through these scary and uncertain times? What should they know? What should they be thinking about in their toolkit? Again, they probably, as you noted, they probably already know a lot of this, but it's just pulling it up in a moment of stress.
Yeah, I think they do know all of it, and there is a level of intentionality that is required. And because we don't know what a lot of our interactions are going to look like, I think a lot of us are really challenged right now to think about our interactions via a screen. How do we make connections with families of babies via a screen? How do we do circle time with a bunch of 3-year-olds when their faces are all a bunch of squares? And that is a big sort of challenge to us. And again, keep it simple, focus on creating attachments, building their initiative, and helping them with their self-regulation. Everything else falls into place when we focus on those things. So we're challenged to think about how do we connect remotely in ways that support attachment. And it takes some practice to get used to talking to your own face. But I think all of you have attended webinars where you didn't connect, you didn't feel like you were connecting, and you've attended webinars where you did feel like you were connecting. And so think about what are the qualities and characteristics of those webinars that helped you feel connected, because that's probably what your kids are going to need too. They're going to need their initiative initiative supported with good instructions for how to do all of this. I've watched many terrible webinars where little ones don't know how to unmute and mute their mics and all that kind of stuff. It's in the little things. It's thinking about how can I empower their initiative to navigate this. And again, keep focusing on self-regulation. If all we do is talk about feelings all day long, we'll be doing a good job.
Yeah. Or I know sometime around April, I got in touch with teacher friends I have around the country and asked what they were doing in their virtual classrooms. And all of them said, our main focus is on maintaining that emotional connection. We don't want to lose that emotional connection with our kids. It's primary, of primary importance. But I guess I am also thinking about, it's hard enough when it's hard when you're in the classroom and you've got 16 or 18 little bodies and you can hear and see everything about them to address all of their needs. Do you have any suggestions on how we even begin to think about it when they're just those little squares on the, and I don't mean to throw you a curveball.
It is a curveball. How do we think about creating connections via a screen? I think is a question we will all be reckoning with. And I will be honest and say that when all of this started, I have 4 kids who started remote learning, and I got to watch as beautiful, wonderful teachers got on and were so frazzled and overwhelmed themselves that they couldn't co-regulate through a screen to settle the kids. And so I think it's so important for us as grown-ups to practice this stuff, to practice the talking and the navigation, because our anxiety comes through to our kids. And so I saw it over and over and over again, and it just broke my heart because I've had a lot of practice doing this over many, many years. And so all of us, all of you who are being asked to do this right now, need practice, and you need to regulate yourself before you get on, because kids feel that. They feel, oh, I can't see you. Oh, I can't hear you. Oh, you need to, all of that stresses everyone out. And so to be able to go, we're going to figure this out together, and to come from a really co-regulating place takes a lot of work. So my first piece is to sort of calm ourselves and do the practice that is required, because this is all new. And then to give ourselves a break when it doesn't go well. But then I think that one of the things that I saw that was sort of heartbreaking with preschool Zooms was that kids who were shy, kids who were quiet, when it was their turn, so a lot of teachers were doing round robin check-ins, which is so great for that connection. But the kids who are more shy, when it was their turn to talk, they just sort of clammed up. And so what do you do in that moment? How do you help a child who's uncomfortable with this format get more comfortable? And so I guess the last thing I will say is, after you do one of these, if you're doing remote instruction, spend 10 minutes afterwards thinking about each child and thinking about how they fared in that moment. Because some of them will be totally fine and some of them will not. And if we can think about the ones who were not and figure out ways to repair, I think that will go a long way. So that's a lot. You put me on the spot with that question, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you for feeling that. Yeah, that was a good answer. And yeah, it was just a good answer. So, and you also brought in that piece of, the self-reflection on the part of the teacher, which is so important in just a normal day-to-day world. So it's got to be even more important now. So one of the things that you talk about in the course is different levels of intervention. So you talk about the universal that works for everybody. You talk about a targeted, and then I think expanded. So can you talk a little bit about that because some kids are going to come back and just the normal things that we do are going to work, but for some it's not. So I think this group would really benefit from hearing your thoughts about the different levels of intervention.
Sure. we all sort of function within the concepts of a pyramid. So when I say pyramid to this room full of people, they are like, I know what you're talking about because we have a million pyramids. But what I always like to say is that all pyramids are based on the same premise, that at the base, we want to serve all kids. In the middle, we want to serve the some kids who need a little extra. And at the top, we want to serve the few kids who need real intensive supports and interventions. And so all, some, few, or universal, targeted, expanded is sort of the way that I think about things. And when I work with kids, I sort of often ask myself, where am I on the pyramid? Am I working with a child who needs me to, you know, just keep doing great things that I'm doing for all kids? Or am I working with a child who needs me to sort of kick it up a notch and increase the volume and the dosage and the umph to that targeted level? And then am I working with a child who, even after I do that, needs additional support? So I often ask myself, where am I on the pyramid, to help me get oriented about the intensity of my intervention. And the interventions, as you said, and I keep saying, are often the same up and down the pyramid. But the dosage, the frequency, the intensity, the duration, the way that we sort of support it, that's what changes. That's what changes.
Okay. Thank you. And right now, I feel as if I feel as if you've answered all of my questions and then some. And because there are so many great questions in the chat box, are you okay, Winston, if we go to Q&A a few minutes early?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, the engagement in the chat box has been phenomenal. We've gotten a lot of good questions. And yeah, Sarah, I don't know if you have a few that you've bookmarked, or I have a couple as well.
Yeah, so, you know, one of them I'm seeing is, how do we establish social connection when we're opening centers and asking children to social distance and not share? Or we usually connect through meeting the teachers, I'm guessing in advance, but that's not possible.
So if we're talking about actual live opening of programs where we have smaller ratios and we have children who are being asked to social distance, how do we create those connections? And, you know, I am not going to sit here and say that I know exactly, because none of us have yet to really experience what it's like to have a room full of 4-year-olds who are being asked to keep a little space between themselves, and how to help create those connections peer-to-peer and peer to grown up. And so I think as we think about peer to grown up, or child to grown up, we need to think about sort of all of the extra tools that we have at our disposal via technology to create connections. So while we may not be able to do a meeting before school starts, we can do a Zoom before school starts. We can write a letter before school starts. We can have things that we share back and forth. Even, you know, the idea of transition objects. You know, I'm going to make this for you and give this to you, and you bring it on the first day. Those kinds of things, I think, help to create connection. Peer-to-peer is going to be super hard, and it's going to be really hard for our children to figure out how to keep that space. It's not how they're built. It's not how any of us are built. And so again, how the grown-up sort of sets that up for kids. Kids need to be able to very clearly understand what those expectations are and have them be enforced, not in a panicky way, but in a very calm and deliberate and consistent way. And so again, I'm going to take you back to the F, the L, the I, and the P, that when we have these moments where kids are really struggling with the distance, to say the feeling, I get it, it's so hard, that we have to give everyone, whatever you're calling it, their space, a bubble, whatever you're using to describe that space. It's so hard. You want to touch your friends and be close to your friends. The limit, right now, we need to give each other space. The inquiry, what can we do to still play with our friends and keep a little space, and then give them ideas. So like literally anytime that I have a problem, I try to take myself through these 4 steps, because I believe that when you sort of give it back to a child and say, what can we do to still play together and keep our space? Then we're helping kids feel that initiative. They're feeling empowered to be part of the solution. We all need to feel part of this, or we won't be able to do it. I think most people are sort of feeling right now like all this stuff is happening to them and they don't have a lot of agency. And so helping kids feel a little agency, I think, will go a long way. They're more likely to do strategies they think they came up with themselves.
Yeah, agreed. And as you talked, for those of you who are more familiar with class, some of what you talked about are things like establishing those clear behavioral expectations in the beginning of the year, being really proactive, and also just recognizing, and this is because Teachtone has also been thinking a lot about what school might look like when it, for those places that open face to face, but you know, it's not going to be the normal first day of school. It's going to be different. It's going to be very different, and so teachers are going to have to spend a lot of time reestablishing or building new relationships. They're going to have to spend a lot of time teaching kids new routines, teaching them about how to wash their hands, what transitions look like, all these things that in a normal year might not take very long at all, may take a lot longer. And that's okay, because, you know, I know that everybody has curriculum that they need to get through, but kids aren't available to learn from formal lessons or even through play if they're not emotionally available. So, you know, earlier in this webinar, Rachel said, you know, give yourself a little slack. And I would say, as teachers, give yourself a little slack, have some self-compassion, know that this year is different from any other year, and try to make peace with that, and be present for your children and really support them. So I'm sorry, I'm in your lane, but
No, I'm so glad your wisdom and expertise is important, because we all need to be part of this conversation. There's not one solution. We cannot predict what all of this is going to look like. We're going to need to feel our way through it, keep talking with each other about it. Everybody here is from different states who are at various levels of opening and closing, and the programs, I get to talk to programs across the country, as I'm sure you all do as well. And the programs who are having kids back already are saying it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. That the change in ratios is helping, that kids are just so happy to be in these sort of more communal spaces. And so it's been interesting to hear from folks who are really starting to get really back into the swing of things, that they're not feeling it. And that's not true for everyone. I'm not going to say across the board, but we don't know. We don't know. And I think it's a lot less about the what and more about the how. The what we do is important. We have to figure that out, but how we do it matters more. And so doing it with as much grace, as much kindness, as much open-mindedness, as much clarity as we can, is all we can do. And to know we're not alone, because everyone else is figuring this out and stumbling through it together.
Winston, do you have a question that you've spotted that you think would be perfect?
Well, there are so many questions, and some of them I think could use their own webinar to tackle. I mean, some of these questions are so big and weighty that I don't want to do them the disservice of trying to tackle them in just a couple minutes. But let's see. Here's a question that I think maybe we could discuss just for a few more minutes. But someone asked, how can I build attachment with new kids that will be enrolled, 3 to 5 years old, whom we will see only online? As preschoolers, we connect best through one-on-one interaction. Mm-hmm. So a new child who their first experience, with this teacher is going to be in an online setting. And what thoughts do you have there?
So I think it will obviously depend on what your access is to the opportunity to do individualized connections. And I think about the ways that we can connect on sort of a spectrum. And I don't know if this will be helpful for everyone to hear, but you know, we start with sort of text, email, phone calls, video conferencing with visual aids, then possibly distance, like meeting from afar, right? So we're sort of on this spectrum all the time of sort of how can I connect? And whatever is available, use. Whatever is available, we're going to use. And I think our kids, even our 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, are learning how to message, are learning how to connect. I think familiarity is really important. So as hard as it may be for us to record ourselves ahead of time, telling stories, recording greetings that kids can watch when they're not on the spot. So this is your teacher, she sent you this video, and you don't have to respond. Nobody's waiting for you to do anything except for to watch her and get to know her. And then you can decide, do you want to record a video back? But I think that creating and building that familiarity will increase the child's ability to engage on all the spectrums. But we have to sort of create that familiarity. It can be through, oh, I forgot, before text is paper, good old paper. And so creating that familiarity through even mail, you know, even those sorts of things can be very helpful.
That's great. And we're thinking about this every day. I mean, as you know, class primarily used in classroom settings, but the concepts of class translate across any channel. And so what do interactions look like in virtual settings like Zoom, or in, you know, in different mediums, and in chats, in emails, and how do you strengthen those interactions and relationships through any means? And so I think that that's great advice. And some people chimed in, said we're doing that and working really well for our 2s and 3s. So
yes.
Thank you, and lots of positive feedback.
And also really being aware of language, and being aware that, you know, when we're talking 2s and 3s and even 4s, expecting that immediate ability for a small child to be able to articulate back and have a 2-way conversation is a lot to ask. And so having other ways to respond, thumbs up, thumbs down, give me a rating, show me on your fingers, those kinds of ways of engaging that don't require any verbal interaction can be really, really helpful as well. And so again, we're gonna stumble through a lot of this, but I trust teachers' instincts a great deal. I want everyone to trust their instincts and your love for children and your desire to connect, because I think that comes through more than anything else. That if you genuinely are there and you really want to connect, kids feel that even through a webcam.
That's great. Those are great insights. I think those are great things for us to take away and to remember. There were a few things that I've jotted down that I'm going to continue to push for myself: is stay calm, follow through, calm yourselves, do the practice, give yourselves a break. So many great ideas. And the phrase of intentional promise keeping, I think is so important when you talk about, you know, relationships and building connections with children. That intentional promise keeping. So pausing to say, what am I going to do? Why am I doing it? Should I do it? And then actually seeing it through and doing it. Just, yeah, Rachel, thank you so much again for being here today and sharing your time and expertise. I've had been monitoring the chat, and so many grateful attendees for the strategies you've shared, the insight, the perspective, the positivity. And so we really appreciate you being here and participating. And lots of folks have asked, you know, how can I learn more about the flip model? And is there a book? And there is. So good news, there is. And someone else sent a message in, so I'll share this, but this is from the website for Centers for Resilient Children, and it's a little bit more about the flip model. And then there is a book that you can purchase. So I will share that link in the chat panel here. And some other good news is that Rachel has contributed to our Interactions at the Heart of Healing course, which we're coming out with in the next few weeks here, which is incredibly exciting. This has been one of those really unique projects for Teachtone, where we've enlisted thought leaders from across the field of trauma to really bring some of the experts and their knowledge into a training that's really, I think, responsive and timely, with concepts that translate not just in kind of the COVID response, but to the response of any children who experience trauma. So some really phenomenal training that we're coming out with soon. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. This interactions at the heart of healing is what we've kind of framed this webinar series around, the training that we're coming out with. And that really is it, is interactions and relationships at the heart of healing from traumatic experiences. And so if you haven't already, this is the last, sadly, in our series of trauma-informed care webinars that we've done with external subject matter experts. But good news is all of these webinars are available on demand on our website. So early July, we had supporting teachers and young learners as they return to the classroom. Those are really class-based strategies from a couple of experts at Teachtone. Our CEO, Bridget Hamry, and LaWanda Roman shared out some great tips there. Impact of trauma on behavior, seeing children's actions as communication, with Jimmy and Amber from the Laurie Center. Sarah helped and was participating in that one with me, which was a phenomenal conversation. We had another great chat with Dr. Ioma Iruka from HighScope, talking about how to become an anti-racist, anti-biased, trauma-informed educator. Phenomenal discussion, and would highly recommend checking that out. And then just last week, we talked about relationship equity in your classroom with Amanda Williford from University of Virginia. So all of these are free. You can access any of them on our website. Let me grab the link real quick, and I'll put that in the chat panel so that you all can take a look at those. Additionally, I'll just share this. I realized I had this link here, but there are several other blog posts and resources and downloads that we've created in response to the needs of educators during the coronavirus. And so some of these are supports for teachers or for the families of your students. Sarah helped with creating a lot of these. We also have some free resources from my Teachtone that we've unlocked and provided for free on the link that I just sent. So I would highly encourage you to check that out. So a couple other updates. I mentioned the training that Rachel participated in. So we've been hard at work developing this online course, which we're super excited about. And in addition to the online course, we actually have some transfer to practice webinars that we could do with your organization for some kind of hands-on learning and guidance around how to respond to trauma most effectively. And we have a new kit. So we have the instructional support kit, which educators have used to improve their instructional support skills. Now we have an emotional support kit. So we've got some new tools that educators can use in the classroom, which we're really excited about as well. And I will send the link to that. Okay, a couple other updates. So Class Foundations for Teachers is a course that we've been promoting for the past 6 months or so. We came out with it this spring, but if you are new to class, which many of you said you are, this is a great course for understanding the fundamentals of class, how interactions work in the classroom, getting some understanding of the class framework. And we've really had some success from educators who have enjoyed this course. And so I'll share the link to that. And I'm just trying to provide you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Fast, Winston. So for people who are new to class, just as Rachel talks about attachment as being so critical for all of the work you do with children, the class itself as a tool is rooted in attachment theory. So it will make some sense, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so too. Lots of concepts we talked about today are baked into classes. So again, it's stuff you're probably already doing, but just turning up the volume and focusing on those great activities you're already doing. A lot of class concepts covered here. So another note is next week, we're hosting our first teacher summit. So earlier this spring, we had the Interact Now virtual summit for educators in the spring. And that was the first virtual summit that we've done. But the feedback was so positive and just overwhelmingly, people enjoyed the experience. We decided that in the fall, as teachers are coming back into this incredibly unique environment, how can we give really, really good, timely information to teachers at this time? So We're happy to have next week, actually, it's crazy that it's just next week, but our virtual teacher summit. And so we would love if you could join us for that. I'll provide the link there. Hopefully some of you are planning to come. We've got some phenomenal speakers lined up for the summit next week. Another resource that we have, a free resource, is the class learning community. If you are not a member of the class learning community, I would highly encourage you to join. It's a free community for educators. It's not necessarily class specific. You can join and trade ideas. There are lots of unique resources and exclusive content there, so I'll send a link to that. And lastly, that's about it. We're ending right at 3 o'clock. Somehow miraculously, we ended right at 3 on the dot. And I just want to say thank you all for attending and for being here and for the work that you do. Obviously, when we ask the question of what are you concerned about, the concerns facing this group are tremendous and daunting and overwhelming. But as Rachel said, trust in your instincts, trust in what you can do and who you are. We're grateful for the work that you do with kids, and just so appreciative of you being here today, for participating. If there are other ideas of webinars or supports that we could provide, feel free to shoot us an email at interactions@teachtone.com. And yeah, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you both.
Yeah,
This has been a phenomenal webinar. Appreciate it.
well, it's been a lot of fun, and thanks to everybody for all their great questions and their participation. You probably said that already, but I just had to repeat it.
It's great. It's overwhelming. I mean, it's great to see all this input. It's phenomenal. So thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe. Take care, and we will see you soon.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.